The woman barely moves, wrists bound by thick chains in the concrete basement. Her captors laugh, convinced they broke her. They mock her silence, unaware she's studying their every move. For 3 days, she counts their patterns while they see only weakness. What they fail to realize is that her stillness isn't defeat, it's preparation. When the lights flicker, something changes in her eyes. The chains that were meant to hold her are about to become weapons. Her captors have made a fatal miscalculation. They thought they caught prey. They caught a predator instead. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more untold stories of extraordinary strength. The damp chill of the basement had settled into Nixia Lazarus's bones over the 72 hours of her captivity. Water dripped steadily from exposed pipes overhead, forming puddles on the concrete floor that reflected the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights. The abandoned textile factory on the outskirts of Valcrest City had become a prison, its walls thick enough to muffle any sounds from the outside world. Not that anyone would hear her, not that she had made a sound. Nixia sat slumped against a metal support beam, her wrists and ankles bound by heavy industrial chains that bit into her skin. Her dark hair hung in matted strands around her face, partially concealing the bruises and dried blood that told the story of her capture. To anyone observing, she appeared broken, defeated, just another victim waiting for an end that would inevitably come. The 3 guards who had been assigned to watch her moved about the basement with the casual confidence of men who believed themselves in complete control. Dravos, the leader, was a burly man with a face marred by a jagged scar that ran from his right temple to the corner of his mouth. Elric was slighter, nervous, his movements quick and twitchy as he constantly checked and rechecked the communications equipment set up near the stairs. Zenith was the most dangerous of the 3. Tall and lean, with calculating eyes that missed nothing, he maintained a professional distance, observing Nixia with cold efficiency. 3 days, and still not a word, Dravos said, approaching Nixia with a plastic water bottle. He unscrewed the cap and held it to her lips. When she didn't respond, he shrugged and poured half of it over her head. The boss said you'd be difficult, but this is just boring. Nixia remained still, allowing the water to soak through her already damp clothing. Her eyes, however, tracked the movement of the bottle. Plastic. Potential weapon, if broken correctly. Too soft to be effective against Dravos, but perhaps useful against Elric. Nobody's coming for you, Dravos continued, crouching down to peer into her face. Nobody even knows you exist. When he received no response, he straightened and kicked water from a nearby puddle at her. The cold splash hit Nixia's face, but she didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't react. Dravos muttered something under his breath and walked back to where Elric was fiddling with a radio transmitter. Any contact? Dravos asked. Elric shook his head. Nothing since yesterday. Could be the storm. Weather reports said it was getting worse. That was information? Nixia filed it away. Storm, potential power outages, disrupted communications, opportunities. From across the room, Zenith was studying the reinforced door that led to the upper levels of the factory. Did you notice the locks on this place? He asked. Military grade. The walls, too. Reinforced concrete with wire mesh. Seems like overkill for one woman. Dravos leaned against a rusty filing cabinet. Orders are orders. Keep her alive until extraction tomorrow. After that, she's not our problem. Extraction tomorrow. Another piece of information. Timeline established. Nixia allowed her eyes to close, giving the appearance of exhaustion or resignation. Behind her closed lids, a brief memory flashed. Herself, in formal attire, at a high-security facility. Glass walls and security checkpoints, men and women in suits with earpieces, then chaos, alarms, gunfire, being dragged away. The memory faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only fragments of context. When she opened her eyes again, the basement had dimmed. Night was falling, and the guards had settled into their evening routine. A small space heater glowed orange near their makeshift break area, where they had set up a card table and 3 folding chairs. A battery-powered lantern provided additional light as the fluorescence above sputtered and occasionally went dark for seconds at a time. Straight flush, Dravos announced, spreading his cards on the table. Read 'em and weep. Elric threw his cards down with a curse while Zenith calmly collected the deck and began shuffling again. A bottle of amber liquid was passed between them, and as the hours wore on, their vigilance began to wane. Their voices grew louder, their jokes cruder, and their attention to their prisoner less consistent. "It's been 24 hours since the last check-in with command," Elric said, checking his phone for the dozenth time. "Should we try to make contact?" Dravos took another swig from the bottle. "Communications blackout is standard procedure. You know that." "Standard procedure is a 12-hour window," Zenith corrected him. "We're well past that." "So what do you want to do?" Dravos challenged. "Break protocol and potentially compromise the entire operation because you're getting antsy? The extraction team will be here at 0600. We just need to sit tight until then." Zenith didn't respond immediately. Instead, he rose from his chair and approached Nixia, studying her with newfound suspicion. "Something's not right," he said finally. "Look at her hands." Nixia kept her breathing steady as Zenith crouched before her, his face inches from hers. His eyes narrowed as he examined her dirt-encrusted fingers. "What about them?" Dravos called from the table. "The calluses," Zenith replied. "Those aren't the hands of an office worker or a civilian. Look at the grip pattern. That's someone who's handled weapons, extensively." Nixia met his gaze without expression, but internally she noted the increased risk. Zenith was observant, dangerous. Priority target when the time came. "You're being paranoid," Dravos said. "The file said she was an analyst. Analysts don't get field training." "What file?" Zenith asked sharply. "We weren't given a file. Just a location, a description, and orders to secure and hold." Dravos fell silent, realizing his mistake. Nixia cataloged this information as well. Dravos had additional knowledge, possible separate briefing, potential conflicting agendas among the team. The moment was broken by Elric's phone buzzing. He glanced at the screen, his face paling. "Guys, I just got a text. Asset profile updated, extreme caution." "What does that mean?" Before either of his companions could answer, the lights flickered more severely than before, plunging the basement into darkness for several seconds before the emergency system kicked in, bathing everything in a dim red glow. "Check the breakers," Dravos ordered. "Probably just the storm." Elric moved toward the electrical panel near the stairs, but Zenith remained where he was, still studying Nixia. During the brief blackout, she had shifted positions slightly, testing the give in the chains, feeling for the weak link she had been working on for the past 2 days. The metal was beginning to fatigue at a specific point where rust had compromised its integrity. "I don't like this," Zenith said, straightening. "Something feels off." He moved to the duffel bag he had brought with him and pulled out a file folder with a red stripe across its cover. As he flipped through the pages, Nixia could see that most of the text was redacted, heavy black lines obscuring all but the most basic information. "What's that?" Dravos asked, approaching. "Insurance," Zenith replied. "I made a copy of what I could find before we were deployed. Not much, but enough to know we weren't given the full picture." As he turned another page, Nixia caught sight of a photograph. It was her, but not as she appeared now. In the image, she wore a military uniform with insignia that had been carefully blacked out. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her expression professional and focused. Most of the accompanying text was redacted, but one line remained visible: specialized in counterintelligence and asymmetric combat scenarios. Zenith's eyes widened as he made the connection. The file slipped from his fingers, papers scattering across the damp floor. "We need to leave," he said, his voice tight. "Now. This isn't who they told us she was." "What are you talking about?" Dravos demanded. "Check the comms again," Zenith ordered Elric, who was still by the electrical panel. "Something's wrong. We need backup." Elric began frantically adjusting dials on the radio equipment. "Nothing. It's like we're being jammed." "That's impossible," Dravos said. "Who would even know we're here?" Zenith's gaze returned to Nixia, who remained motionless against the support beam. "I think we've been set up," he said quietly. The lights flickered again, longer this time. When they stabilized, Zenith had drawn his weapon, a compact handgun that he now aimed at Nixia. "Don't move," he warned, though she hadn't shifted position. "What the hell are you doing?" Dravos asked. "Look at her," Zenith replied. "Really look. Has she asked for water? For food? Has she complained about the cold or the chains? Has she begged for her life or tried to bargain? Has she done anything that a normal kidnapping victim would do? Dravos frowned, the realization slowly dawning on him. So, what are you saying? I'm saying we need to call this in and get extracted now, Zenith said, not taking his eyes off Nixia. Before whatever is being planned happens. The comms are still down, Elric reported, his voice rising with panic. I can't get through to anyone. Then we move her, Zenith decided. Change locations? Get to the backup rendezvous point. That's not the protocol, Dravos argued. Screw the protocol, Zenith snapped. Something's wrong here. If you want to stay and find out what, be my guest. As the men argued, the power fluctuated again. This time, when the emergency lights came back on, Nixia had shifted her position ever so slightly. The movement was barely perceptible, but it was enough for Zenith to notice. Don't, he warned, tightening his grip on his weapon. For the first time since her capture, Nixia smiled. It was a small thing, just the faintest upward curve of her lips, but the effect was chilling. You should have listened to him, she said, her voice rough from disuse but steady. You should have left when you had the chance. The basement plunged into darkness again, more completely this time. The emergency lights failed to activate, leaving only the faint glow of Elric's phone screen illuminating a small circle near the communications equipment. For 3 full seconds, the darkness was absolute. Get the lights back on, Dravos barked, his voice betraying the first hints of genuine concern. When the emergency system finally kicked in, bathing the basement in that eerie red glow, Nixia was no longer slumped against the support beam. She stood in the center of the room, the chains around her wrists hanging loose like metallic serpents. Her posture had completely transformed. Where before she had appeared broken and defeated, now she stood with perfect balance, her weight distributed evenly. Hands relaxed at her sides in a way that any trained fighter would recognize as deceptive readiness. Dravos laughed nervously, hand moving toward the weapon holstered at his hip. Sit back down before I put you down. Nixia didn't respond verbally. In one fluid motion, she swung the loose chain in her right hand, the heavy links whistling through the air before wrapping around Dravos's extended arm. With a sharp pull and a precise twist of her body, she used his own momentum against him, bringing him off balance and into the range of her elbow, which connected with his temple with surgical precision. Dravos staggered but didn't fall. He was a large man, accustomed to physical confrontation. He regained his stance and lunged forward, attempting to use his size advantage to grapple Nixia to the ground. She sidestepped him with almost casual grace, allowing his forward momentum to carry him past her before she delivered a targeted strike to the base of his spine. This time, Dravos went down to one knee, gasping. Elric fumbled for his weapon, the panic now evident on his face. "Stay where you are!" he shouted, his voice cracking. Nixia had already calculated his movement pattern. In the brief darkness, she had positioned herself near a section of exposed pipe that ran along the wall. With a sharp twist, she broke off a length of metal, approximately 2 feet long. As Elric raised his weapon, she threw the pipe with precision, striking his wrist and sending the gun clattering to the floor. "Wait," Elric pleaded, backing toward the stairs. "We were just following orders." Nixia spoke for the first time since her transformation, her voice steady and cold. "So am I." Zenith, unlike his companions, didn't waste time with threats or excuses. He fired his weapon, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Nixia had anticipated this as well, having already shifted her position the moment his finger tightened on the trigger. The bullet struck the concrete where she had been standing a fraction of a second earlier. The basement erupted into controlled chaos. Nixia moved with purpose, transforming the environment into a weapons system. She kicked the puddle of water toward Elric, who had been moving to retrieve his fallen gun. In the same motion, she grabbed an electrical cord that had been partially exposed from the wall and tossed it into the expanding puddle. The resulting shock wasn't lethal, but it was enough to send Elric convulsing to the ground, temporarily incapacitated. Dravos had regained his footing and drawn a combat knife from his boot. He charged again, this time more cautiously, the blade held low and ready. Nixia met his attack with the chain, now wrapped around her forearm as a makeshift bracer. The knife struck the metal with a shower of sparks, and before Dravos could retract for another strike, Nixia had locked his wrist with her free hand, applying precise pressure to the radial nerve. The knife fell from suddenly numb fingers. Nixia didn't pause to capitalize on the advantage. She continued her movement, using the chain to entangle Dravos's arm while simultaneously delivering a series of targeted strikes to vulnerable pressure points. Within seconds, the large man was on the ground, conscious but unable to rise, his nervous system temporarily overloaded by the precise neurological interruptions her strikes had caused. Zenith watched this unfold with the cold calculation of a professional assessing another professional. He fired twice more, each shot placed with precision that would have neutralized an ordinary opponent. But Nixia was already moving before his finger completed the trigger pull, as if she could read the minute muscle tensions that telegraphed his intentions. "You're not just an analyst," Zenith said, ejecting his spent magazine and loading a fresh one with practiced efficiency. "What are you?" Nixia didn't answer immediately. She retrieved the length of pipe she had thrown earlier, testing its weight and balance. When she finally spoke, her tone was almost conversational. "The real question is what you are," she said. "Mercenary, private contractor, or something more official?" Zenith backed toward the scattered papers from his file, keeping his weapon trained on her. "I asked the questions." "Not anymore." Nixia advanced slowly, her movements measured and deliberate. "Who hired you? Who's running the operation? What's the extraction plan?" Zenith fired again, but Nixia had already calculated the trajectory. She deflected the shot with the pipe, the bullet ricocheting into the concrete wall. Before he could fire again, she closed the distance between them, moving inside his firing arc and rendering the gun temporarily useless unless he wanted to risk shooting himself. The ensuing hand-to-hand combat was like a deadly dance, each movement precise, each counter anticipated and met with equal skill. But where Zenith fought with increasing desperation, Nixia maintained perfect emotional control, her breathing steady, her strikes economical and devastating. "You're Valkyrie!" Zenith gasped as he blocked a strike that would have collapsed his trachea. Recognition dawned in his eyes. "The Ghost program? They said you were a myth." "That was the point," Nixia replied, advancing toward him. Zenith attempted to create distance, but found himself backed against the wall. "We were told you were an analyst who stole classified information, a traitor." "By whom?" Nixia asked, continuing her relentless advance. "Osiris Corporation," Zenith finally revealed, as Nixia applied precise pressure to his carotid artery, carefully controlling the blood flow to his brain without causing permanent damage. "They said you had classified intel, that you were a threat to national security." Nixia's eyes narrowed. "They lied." With a final precise strike, Zenith joined his unconscious colleagues on the concrete floor. Nixia stood alone in the center of the basement, surrounded by the men who had been her captors. Her breathing remained steady, only slightly elevated despite the exertion of the fight. She took a moment to assess her physical condition: bruised ribs, mild dehydration, superficial lacerations on her wrists and ankles from the chains. Nothing that would significantly impair function. The basement was silent now, except for the steady drip of water from the pipes overhead and the occasional groan from one of the incapacitated guards. Nixia moved methodically, securing each man with the same chains that had held her captive. She was careful not to cause unnecessary pain or injury, her actions precise and professional rather than vengeful. Once the guards were secure, she began to search the basement more thoroughly. The duffel bag Zenith had brought contained not only the redacted file, but also several electronic devices: a satellite phone, a tablet computer with specialized encryption, a set of ID badges with various corporate and government logos. Nixia examined each item carefully, her trained eye noting details that would have escaped most observers. The tablet was military grade, with security features only available to certain government contractors. The ID badges used a specific holographic overlay that was restricted to agencies with top-secret clearance. From a concealed compartment in the heel of her boot, Nixia extracted a small device no larger than a thumbtack. She activated it with a precise sequence of pressure points, and a tiny LED glowed green, indicating functionality. She placed the device near her ear. "Nomad to command," she said quietly. "Infiltration successful. Phase 1 complete." For several seconds, there was only static. Then a voice responded, distorted but intelligible. "Command to Nomad. Authentication required." "Sierra Tango. 39 Echo 7, Nixia replied without hesitation. Another pause, then, "Authentication accepted. Situation report. 3 hostiles neutralized, Nixia reported. Location secure. Have confirmed connection between OSIRIS Corporation and the security breach. Evidence collected. Moving to extraction point with intelligence package. The response that came back was not what she had expected. Command to Nomad. Extraction team compromised. Repeat. Extraction team compromised. You're on your own, Commander. Nixia absorbed this information without visible reaction. Understood. Implementing protocol sundown. She returned the communication device to its hiding place and continued her methodical search of the basement. From Elric's equipment, she recovered a hard drive that appeared to contain communications logs. From Dravos, she took a set of keys and a small notebook filled with what appeared to be coded meeting locations and times. From Zenith, she collected the scattered pages of the redacted file, carefully organizing them into a coherent sequence. As she worked, fragments of memory continued to surface. The high-security facility where she had been stationed, the classified project she had been overseeing, the first signs of the breach in their systems, the decision to use herself as bait to uncover the conspiracy, the carefully orchestrated kidnapping that had been designed to make her appear compromised, allowing her to infiltrate the organization that had been targeting her agency. Nixia hadn't been kidnapped. She had allowed herself to be captured to trace the corruption to its source. She photographed each piece of evidence using a micro camera also concealed in her clothing, creating a digital backup of everything she found. When she was satisfied that she had collected all available intelligence, she turned her attention to her physical needs, locating a supply of bottled water and a basic first aid kit in the guards area. She cleaned and bandaged the worst of her wounds, rehydrated, and conducted a series of subtle stretching exercises to restore circulation to muscles that had been held in one position for too long. Her movements were efficient, wasting no energy, her mind already calculating the next phase of her mission. The most critical piece of information she had obtained was the connection to OSIRIS Corporation, a major defense contractor with ties to multiple government agencies. OSIRIS had been under investigation for suspected contract irregularities and potential security compromises. Now, she had confirmation of their involvement in something far more serious. But the compromised extraction team suggested a larger problem. If her own agency's security had been breached to that extent, the conspiracy reached higher than she had initially suspected. She would need to be extremely cautious about whom she trusted moving forward. Nixia approached the stairs leading out of the basement, pausing to look back at the scene. The 3 guards now secured and beginning to regain consciousness, the scattered equipment, the chains that had held her, now broken. "This was never about escape," she murmured. "This was just the beginning." Nixia ascended the stairs with measured steps, pausing at the top to listen carefully before opening the door. The factory floor beyond was cavernous and dark, moonlight filtering through broken windows high above. Massive looms and spinning machines stood like silent sentinels, their metal frames rusted and draped with cobwebs. The storm that had been affecting communications had passed, leaving behind a hushed stillness broken only by the occasional drip of water from the leaking roof. Moving with practiced stealth, Nixia navigated through the abandoned machinery, her senses alert for any sign of additional security. The factory appeared deserted, but experience had taught her that appearances were often deliberately misleading. She located the loading dock at the rear of the building, its heavy metal door partially open, revealing the night sky beyond. Before exiting, she retrieved a small device from Zenith's equipment bag, a signal detector. She activated it and performed a sweep of the immediate area. No active transmissions detected, no surveillance equipment, no motion sensors. Either the team had been extremely confident in their ability to contain her, or they had deliberately avoided leaving an electronic footprint that might be traced. Stepping outside, Nixia felt the cool night air against her skin, a stark contrast to the damp mustiness of the basement. The factory was situated on the outskirts of Valcrest City, in an industrial zone long abandoned as manufacturing had moved overseas. The nearest occupied buildings were at least a mile away, their lights visible as a distant glow against the night sky. She consulted the notebook taken from Dravos, quickly deciphering the simple substitution, cipher used to encode the locations. The extraction team had been scheduled to arrive at 0600 from the Northwest Access Road. But given that command had informed her the team was compromised, she now needed to assume that anyone approaching the factory was potentially hostile. Nixia needed transportation. According to the notebook, the team had parked their vehicle in an abandoned warehouse 3 blocks east. Moving through the shadows between buildings, she maintained a vigilant awareness of her surroundings, pausing occasionally to ensure she wasn't being followed. The warehouse, when she reached it, was smaller than the factory, its corrugated metal walls rusted through in places. A side door hung partially off its hinges, and Nixia slipped through the opening without disturbing it further. Inside, as indicated in the notebook, was a nondescript black SUV with government plates, standard issue for field operations, where a low profile was desired without completely abandoning official authority. Using the keys taken from Dravos, Nixia unlocked the vehicle and conducted a thorough inspection. No tracking devices visible on the undercarriage or in the wheel wells. No tampering with the engine components that might indicate a bomb or remote kill switch. The fuel tank was 3/4 full, sufficient for her immediate needs. Inside the glove compartment, she found additional ammunition for the weapons taken from the guards, a set of credentials identifying the bearer as a Department of Energy inspector, and a sealed envelope. The envelope bore no markings, but the paper was high quality, the kind used for official government correspondence. Nixia opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph of 5 government officials standing on what appeared to be the steps of a government building in Washington, D.C. 4 of the figures were men in standard dark suits, their expressions professionally neutral. The 5th was a woman in her 50s, her posture military straight despite the civilian attire. One face was circled in red, that of a distinguished-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. Director Lawrence Ambrose, head of the National Intelligence Directorate, and Nixia's former mentor. The implication was clear and disturbing. If Ambrose was involved in the conspiracy, the corruption reached to the highest levels of the intelligence community. The betrayal was more profound than she had anticipated, the danger correspondingly greater. Nixia started the vehicle and pulled out of the warehouse, keeping the headlights off until she reached the main road. As she drove, she mentally reviewed what she knew. Osiris Corporation had been using mercenaries, possibly with official sanction, to capture and contain her. They believed she possessed classified intelligence that made her a threat. The extraction team that should have been her backup had been compromised, suggesting infiltration of her own agency. And now there was evidence implicating Director Ambrose, one of the most respected figures in the intelligence community, and the man who had personally recruited her for Project Valkyrie. The pieces didn't fit together neatly, which meant she was still missing critical information. Nixia needed to find a secure location where she could analyze the evidence more thoroughly and establish a communication channel that wouldn't be compromised. As she drove toward the city center, Nixia caught sight of a roadblock ahead. Police vehicles with flashing lights were stopping all traffic entering the main highway. This wasn't unusual in itself, but the timing was suspicious. She turned off onto a side street before reaching the checkpoint, taking a more circuitous route toward her destination. Valcrest City at night was a study in contrasts. The gleaming skyscrapers of the financial district rose like crystal formations against the night sky, while the older industrial areas remained largely in shadow, streetlights broken or dimmed by decades of neglect. Nixia navigated through these darker streets where police presence was minimal and questions were rarely asked. She parked the SUV in a public garage near the central train station, choosing a spot between 2 similar vehicles to make it less conspicuous. After wiping down any surfaces she had touched, she proceeded on foot, moving with the purposeful stride of someone with legitimate business, neither hurrying nor lingering. The safe house was located in a mixed-use building on the edge of the financial district, a nondescript apartment above a 24-hour convenience store. It wasn't officially designated as an agency location, but rather one of several properties Nixia had established over the years, using covers and financial channels that couldn't be easily traced back to her official identity. After verifying that the security measures were intact and no one had entered the apartment in her absence, Nixia allowed herself the luxury of a quick shower, washing away the grime of captivity. The hot water stung the abrasions on her wrists and ankles, but the pain was clarifying, helping to focus her thoughts. Clean and dressed in fresh clothing retrieved from a hidden compartment in the bedroom closet, Nixia spread the collected evidence across the dining table: the redacted file, the electronic devices, the coded notebook, the photograph of Director Ambrose, individual pieces of a puzzle that, when assembled correctly, would reveal the full extent of the conspiracy. From another hidden compartment, this one built into the underside of the kitchen counter, she retrieved a laptop computer, specially modified, with security features not available to the general public. After booting up with a series of complex authentication protocols, she began the process of analyzing the digital evidence. The hard drive from Elric's communications equipment contained mostly routine status reports and logistics coordination, but there were several encrypted files that required more sophisticated decryption tools. Nixia set those aside for later analysis and turned her attention to the tablet computer taken from Zenith. The encryption on the tablet was military grade, but Nixia had access to decryption algorithms specifically designed to bypass such security measures. After several minutes of intensive processing, the tablet yielded its contents: operations reports, personnel files, mission briefs, all relating to something called Operation Clean Sweep. According to the files, Operation Clean Sweep was a classified initiative to identify and neutralize potential security risks within the intelligence community. On the surface, it appeared to be a legitimate counterintelligence operation, the kind of internal audit that occurred periodically to ensure the integrity of sensitive operations. But as Nixia delved deeper into the documentation, concerning patterns emerged. The criteria for designating individuals as security risks were vague and subjective. The due process normally required for internal investigations had been circumvented through a series of emergency authorizations. And most troubling, the operation was being run not through the usual counterintelligence channels, but through a special task force reporting directly to Director Ambrose. Nixia found her own name on a list of priority targets, along with several colleagues from Project Valkyrie. The justification given was suspected unauthorized access to classified materials related to OSIRIS Corporation contracts, but no specific evidence was cited. It was a pretense, not a legitimate investigation. But why? What could be so important about OSIRIS Corporation's contracts that it would warrant this level of cover-up? Nixia returned to the encrypted files from Elric's hard drive, applying a more sophisticated decryption algorithm. Slowly, the files began to yield their contents. What she found confirmed her worst suspicions. Osiris had been using government contracts as cover for a much more ambitious and disturbing project. Under the guise of developing advanced surveillance systems for national security, they had been creating a sophisticated infrastructure for data collection and analysis that went far beyond legal authorization. The system would allow whoever controlled it to monitor and potentially manipulate everything from financial markets to election systems, from military communications to private electronic correspondence. And Director Ambrose was not just aware of the project, he was actively facilitating it, using his position to ensure that regulatory oversight was misdirected, and potential whistleblowers were discredited or eliminated. Project Valkyrie, with its focus on identifying internal security threats, had inadvertently uncovered evidence of the Osiris operation during a routine security audit. Rather than shut down the illicit project, Ambrose had designated the Valkyrie team as a threat, using Operation Clean Sweep as a mechanism to neutralize them before they could expose the truth. Nixia sat back, processing the implications. This wasn't just corruption or overreach. This was a fundamental betrayal of everything the intelligence community was supposed to stand for. And it reached to the highest levels of government. She needed to get this information to people who could act on it, individuals whose loyalty to the Constitution outweighed any personal or political allegiances. But with Ambrose's influence and resources, that would be no simple task. Nixia encrypted her findings and uploaded them to a secure server, accessible only with a specific combination of the authentication factors. Then she deleted all local copies of the files, ensuring that even if her equipment was captured, the evidence would remain secure. Dawn was breaking over Valcrest City as Nixia prepared for the next phase of her mission. From a hidden safe in the apartment, she retrieved a new set of identification documents, a secure communication device, and a compact 9mm handgun with a full magazine of ammunition. The weight of the weapon was familiar and reassuring in her hand, a tool she hoped she wouldn't need to use, but was prepared to if necessary. She studied the photograph of Director Ambrose once more, the man who had been her mentor and champion, the man who had recruited her into the intelligence community with stirring words about duty and service, the man who had betrayed everything he claimed to stand for. The higher they are, the harder they fall, Nixia murmured, tucking the photograph into her jacket pocket. Outside, the city was coming to life, the streets filling with early morning commuters, unaware of the shadow war being waged in their midst. Nixia joined the flow of pedestrians, another face in the crowd, her expression determined but composed. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't even about justice for herself and her team. This was about protecting the very foundations of democracy from those who would subvert them for power and profit. As she walked toward the rising sun, Nixia Lazarus, commander of Project Valkyrie, made a silent vow. She would expose the truth, no matter the cost. She would bring down those responsible, regardless of their position or influence. And she would ensure that systems meant to protect the public were never again turned against them. The chains that had bound her in that basement were now broken, but the real work of breaking the chains of corruption was just beginning.